Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Cooking on a Student Budget. My name is Kevin Canale. I'm a master's student at Bastyr University, and I'm studying nutrition. Today, we're going to be cooking some rice, some beet greens, celery, onions, some beautiful oyster mushrooms, and a little bit of radish. Give us some flavor for our dish, and we're just going to stir fry everything together, throw it on top of the rice, and then we're going to enjoy it. So first we're going to start with the onions. So I'm going to grab this big onion over here. And pretty much everything that we're cooking today came from the Rogers Community Garden. So thank you to them for allowing us to eat some of their yummy food. And for an onion, you just cut off the top because it's going to get in the way. You can actually use this for the stir fry. I don't think we're going to do that today, but you're more than welcome to if you're growing onions at home. And then I just peel the top layer of onion off. And this also helps if there's a little bit of extra dirt stuck on the onion, just cleans it off that extra little bit. And then to cut the onion, I usually start by simply cutting it in half. And every time you have a round object like this, it's nice to cut it in half. That way it's not going to be rolling around on your cutting board and you're not chasing after pieces after you cut it. So now that I put the flat side down and I'm holding my knife using my thumb and index finger directly on the blade, and this helps both relieve some of the pressure on your wrist and it gives you a lot of control while you're cutting. I'm just going to cut down the side of the onion, keeping the tip of my knife on the cutting board as much as possible. This again adds stability to it. Flipping the onion around. Just cutting it down the other side, getting it into nice cubes. And we're just going to do the same thing for the other side. You want to try to cut the onion in as uniform of pieces as possible. And this just allows for the onion to cook evenly while you stir fry it. Doesn't have to be exact or perfect, but we're just aiming for as similar sized pieces as possible. And for now, we're just going to throw all the onion in a bowl. We're going to get our pan heated. So always heat your pan before you put oil and food on it. And this is going to help both limit the amount of time the oil is exposed to heat, which causes some carcinogens to form. And also, having a hot pan allows for the food you're cooking on it to stay separated from the actual surface of the pan. So we're just going to wait till our pan gets a little bit warm. We're going to test it with the palm of our hand over the pan, but obviously you don't want to directly contact it. So next we're going to cut up the kohlrabi. For those of you that aren't that familiar with this food, neither am I, so we're going to learn about it together. But it's a very sweet tasting food and it's going to add some nice flavors and a slightly different nutrient profile to the rest of the food that we have. So one of the great things about cooking a stir fry is you can add pretty much whatever you want. So if you don't like one of these things, you don't have access to it, it's not going to change your meal an incredibly large amount. If you decide you don't like something, don't put it in. It's pretty easy. So again, I cut it in half just to keep it from rolling around, and now I'm cutting it into quarters. Now I'm probably going to cut the skins off of it just because I'm not exactly sure how it tastes. If you had the time and the ability to peel it, you could probably peel it off instead of cutting it. So it has this really beautiful white flesh in the center of it. And we're just going to cut it into very thin slices, trying to maintain at least a part of our knife on the cutting board. It's harder with a larger piece like this. And then we're just going to matchstick this out. So I have thin pieces that, are about the width of a matchstick, and then we're just going to go down the sides of it till we have a lot of nice small pieces. And this is going to help it to cook more quickly, and it's going to give a nice texture for the stir fry as well. So if you have a little bit of a different texture for each of the foods that you're putting in it, it's just going to give a nice variety, so you don't get bored with maybe it's all cubed or something like that. Just changes things up a little bit. So this cuts pretty nicely. It'd be good to try, and being willing to try new things is also a good way to just include a different variety in what you're eating. You don't have to break the bank to have variety. So we're almost done with this here. And one thing you want to do when you're cooking a stir fry is you want to put the vegetable that is a little more tough and it's going to take longer to cook in first, and then you add the ingredients that need less time to cook. So we have beet greens over here that we're going to add last because greens generally are the quickest to cook, and so we don't want them to be soggy and gross and devoid of nutrients by the time we get to eat them. So next I think we're going to cut the mushrooms up. And these mushrooms are all grown at the garden, believe it or not, and they're just incredibly beautiful. These mushrooms are hard to come by at the grocery store, so it's really cool that we have them here. And for this, I'm just going to kind of ribbon them similar to the kohlrabi. And I'm just making them into more of a bite-sized piece. But if you wanted to stir fry a whole mushroom, you could use it instead of a burger, throw it in a bun, eat it like that. Then we have a little bit of soy sauce for the mushrooms. I think that's going to add a little bit more salty flavor, and it's going to generally enhance the umami that you're going to get from the mushrooms. So our pan hopefully is starting to warm up a little bit. I'm going to go back and check it really quick. Feels warm enough to me. So we have a little bit of avocado oil, and avocado oil actually has a very high smoke point, so it's great for cooking on the stovetop. Generally speaking, you have to be a lot more careful with olive oil because it has a much lower smoke point, and that again is going to produce more carcinogens in it, and we're not aiming to give ourselves cancer or anything like that. So using a high smoke point oil is always the best option. So right now our pan is warm enough, we have our oil in it. Our oil has heated up a little bit, so we're going to add the onions. And onions are super easy to cook. You can cook them really quickly over a very short amount of time with high heat, or you can actually cook them for hours over a low heat and they will taste very, very sweet after that. But today I think we're going to cook them over more of a high heat and just try to cook them fairly quickly. Might be good to cook it more quickly if you have exams coming up or something like that. You don't have 3 hours to make your meal. So these greens are called Swiss chard, and they come from the beet plant. So when you grow a beet, some of the beets are actually specifically grown. They don't have a very big root bulb, and so they're grown just for their greens. This kind of seems like a normal sized beet to me, but the greens are still great to use. And some people might have a harder time digesting these middle stem pieces. So for beets and for Swiss chard, generally it's not a huge problem, more for kale or for collard greens. But just to demonstrate it today, I'm gonna cut the stem out of it. We probably won't cut the stem out of every single piece, but I figured it'd be good to show you guys. So we're just gonna take the stem. We're gonna take our knife, the tip of the knife, and we're just gonna run it next to the stem all the way down the piece. Then we're gonna move to the other side of the stem and just run it down again. And you still have the stem attached, but you can just grab the top and just clip it off really quick. And this makes for a very nice and tender green to eat. Thankfully our knife is very sharp, so we can cut this Swiss chard, and I just shred this very finely. And this helps the greens to cook quicker, and the quicker you cook it, the more nutrients are going to stay intact. So the whole reason why we cook food is to gain more nutrients from it. Generally speaking, you will gain more nutrients when you cook a food. There are certain things like vitamin C that are heat sensitive, and you will lose those nutrients, which is also why you want to have a variety of cooked and raw foods. So since I demonstrated cutting the stem off of one of them, I'm just gonna cut the rest of these normally. And like I said, for the most part, the stems for Swiss chard aren't super tough on people's digestive tracts. And like I said already, we have our rice cooked. And what you want to do for rice generally is you're going to take a cooking pot that's, a normal size. You're going to fill the bottom with rice, and then you can use your index finger and go to the first knuckle, and that's how high you want to fill it with water. And then you leave the rice covered and cook it for about 20 minutes until all the water has been cooked up. And then what I like to do is I'll take the pan off the heat for an additional 10 minutes and just leave it covered so that all the moisture stays in the rice. If you take the cover off the rice right away, you're gonna evaporate some of the extra moisture and you might dry the rice out just a little bit. Get a little bit of a brown to the onions. So I might turn the heat down just a little bit and then add the kohlrabi really quickly. And then I'm going to let that cook for another minute or two, add the mushrooms, and then we'll add the Swiss chard at the end. I think right when I add the mushrooms, I'm going to throw a little bit of soy sauce on there. And then I generally don't add salt until after I'm done. Salt tends to dry things out, and we're not aiming to dry anything out in this stir fry right now. I don't think anyone wants to eat a dried out mushroom in their stir fry, so we'll wait for the very end to do that part. So I hope you guys so far have learned quite a bit. One of the nice things about onions is it has a lot of antioxidant properties. And we didn't get any garlic today, but garlic also has a lot of good antioxidant properties. And one trick that's really cool with garlic is you cut it and then you leave it on the counter for 10 minutes. That allows the enzymatic activity of the garlic to activate, and then you cook it and it has more antioxidant properties than if you just cut it and cook it directly. Okay, so now that the onions are cooked down and the kohlrabi is starting to get a little bit tender, we're gonna throw the mushrooms in. And then I'm just gonna put an estimated 2 tablespoons of soy sauce in there. We might actually need to turn the heat up a tiny bit for that. And because we added soy sauce, I probably actually won't add any salt to the end of this, since soy has a lot of salty flavor already. So now what I'm gonna do is just try to get the mushrooms to look a little bit more cooked down, maybe a little bit more browned. The onions are gonna brown a little bit more. And it's hard to tell with the soy sauce, but I'm sure the kohlrabi will look a little more translucent as well. We're just gonna let this simmer for maybe 2 to 3 more minutes. So in a pinch, you could probably cook this meal in about 5 minutes. I'm taking a little bit of my time because we have time to spare, but if you really wanted to get everything done, I would say generally start the rice right away, and then by the time everything else is prepped, you can put it on a hot pan and you could cook it in about 5 minutes, I would say. Since we have a little bit of extra time and we have this beautiful cabbage, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this. So cabbage has a nice little stem at the base of it, and we're gonna utilize this stem to cut this in a very uniform way and safe way. So I cut it down the center, and this allows the stem to stay intact, which keeps all of the leaves on it as well. And then we're gonna cut it in half again through the stem. So now we have this nice quartered piece, and we haven't made a mess. Like, I can hold it by almost nothing, and it's not into 700 little pieces yet. Then we're just gonna take it by the quarter, keep our fingers nice and in, and we're just gonna go down towards the base, keeping our knife nice and stable. And this is a super easy and convenient way to have all your cabbage cut without any real effort. And we still have the stem, which we can just throw in our compost. And I'm just gonna throw the cabbage in just a tiny bit before I throw in the Swiss chard. So cabbage has a little bit more of a tough leaf, and that's generally speaking, but it looks like we're ready to add the greens. So I'm gonna throw the cabbage in first really quick. Just try to let it cook down for 30 seconds tops. And then after that, we're gonna throw in the Swiss chard, and then we're gonna plate everything. Do we have a plate? Or plates, or serving, whatever. So the cabbage has been in there for about 30 seconds. We're gonna add the Swiss chard. Cook that up. And we actually have a lot in the pan right now, so I'm gonna add a little bit more oil. Whoop. One nice thing about cooking with oil or other fats is fat-soluble vitamins don't get absorbed into our bodies unless we're eating with fats. So vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K, which you're gonna get a lot of vitamin K in these greens. They won't be absorbed unless you're eating the foods with fat. So always be sure to, even if you're eating it raw, just add like a tablespoon or two of extra virgin olive oil or something like that, whatever you can find in your cupboard. And this will help to absorb all of those nutrients that you'd otherwise miss out on. All right, so this is done. We're gonna get some rice going on a plate and throw this all together. So when I make a stir fry like this, I always like to put the rice on the bottom. Just makes it a little bit nicer for presentation. And then a nice little scoop. Try to make sure we get a little bit of everything in there. And then I might just add just a tiny sprinkle of cinnamon on the top. It's a very dangerous way to do this. I would recommend putting some in your hand first. Just a tiny, tiny bit. Cool. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something today. Enjoy.